Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It is the 30th of November, and we're getting ready for Parshas Vayetze. I'm very excited to share some sources with you on the Parsha this week that hopefully will make this a little bit more meaningful. The first one I want to share with you today was new to me, and we're going to see different ways, two different ways to deal with a question that should be jumping out at us in the psukim, just something in the verse that did not catch my eye until this year. So I want to start with that. So we're going to start actually by backing up a couple of weeks. We're going to back up to the end of Parshas Vayera. In the end of Parshas Vayera, after the Akedas Yitzchak, Avraham is told by Hashem how his brother Nachor, how his family has grown. So I'm bringing this up because I want to review what the family tree is. So the pasuk says as follows. This is after Akedas Yitzchak. It's chapter 22, Parachav Beis. So it says as follows. Vayi acharei hadvarim ha'ila. It was after these matters, meaning after Akedas Yitzchak. Vayugadl Avraham lemor, was told to Avraham, saying, Hine yolda Milka gam hi banim leNachor achicha. Behold, Milka has given birth. She was one of the wives of Nachor, who was a brother of Avram. We know Avram had two brothers. He had Nachor and he had Haran. So Nachor, your brother Nachor's wife Milka, she had some children. So Nachor and Milka have had some children. Who are they? Chaf Aleph. Es Utz Becharo, Ves Buz Achiv, Ves Kmuel Avi Aram. So the first three that it lists is Uz, Buz, and Kemuel. These are nephews of Avram because they're sons of Nachor. And then it says, Ves Kesed, Ves Chazo, Ves Pildash, Ves Yidlaf. Another four nephews of Avraham. These are some names that, again, we hear them once. They go in one ear out the other. Kesed, Chazo, Pildash, and Yidlaf. But then here's the one that means something to us. Ves Besuel. Avram has another nephew, because again, Nachor is a brother of Avraham, and Avraham's brother Nachor and his wife Milka have had several children. One of them is named Besuel. So Besuel is a nephew of Avraham. Now, what do we know about Besuel? Chav Gimel, next pasuk. Besuel Yolades Rivka. Avraham's nephew Besuel has a daughter whose name is Rivka. Shmona Ela Yolda Milka leNachor Achi Avraham. So Milka and Nachor again was the brother of Avram. They had these 8 children, and the important one, Rashi points out, this whole yichus, this whole family tree, telling us all these 8 children was really only important because of that one son, Besuel. That's why we really don't even recognize those others' names. And why do we need to know about Besuel? Because Besuel has Rivka. By the way, Besuel had a son as well. What was his name? What was that, Layla? Lavan, exactly. Lavan's name is not listed there. Very interesting. Some of the Mefarshim point this out. Isn't that fascinating? All it tells us is a Besuel Yaladis Rivka. Besuel has a daughter named Rivka. It doesn't tell us anything about Lavan. And so again, Rashi will point out, well, the whole point of this exercise, why it even gave us these names, was to tell us about Rivka. It wasn't important about Lavan. We just needed to know about Rivka because immediately Parshas Chayesara is going to begin, where we're going to find out about Rivka. We don't really care about Lavan right now. That's not the necessary piece of information. That's what Rashi tells us. I saw a fascinating piece, though, from Rav Shimon Schwab. It's not in today's sources, but just want to share this with you. Rav Shimon Schwab points out that on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, this is what's laned. And we end the laning with this. So it's really anticlimactic. Like we've just read about the Akedas Yitzchak, and then we read after the Akedah about Pidlash and Yidlaf, and then Besuel. This all seems so secondary. We've just had the pinnacle of the reading was the Akedas Yitzchak, and now we're reading about Pidlash and Yidlaf. Like what do we need this for? Why do we need this information? So Rav Schwab has a suggestion, and he points out as follows. Just what we noticed is that, did you notice one name missing from this list? It said Besuel has a child whose name is Rivka. Well, Besuel had another child. Besuel had a son whose name was Lavan, and Lavan's not there. So Rav Schwab suggested the reason why we read this on Rosh Hashanah is to point out to us that startling omission, that we're looking at this list and all of a sudden we say, whoa, there's a name that should be there that's missing. That should be jarring. That should shock each and every one of us. There's a missing name. And we should be thinking on Rosh Hashanah, where the Sifrei HaChaim v'Hamesim are open, God's books, his ledgers are open in front of him, deciding what kind of a year everyone's going to have and who's going to be written in the book of life and the book of death. And we should think to ourselves, just like we noticed Lavan's name is not there, and that's startling. Oh my gosh, I want to make sure my name is written in a different book, in God's Sifrei HaChaim, his book of Chaim Tovim. So that should really encourage us to daven with all of our soul and all of our heart. That was what Rav Schwab suggests, just again, but that only explains why is it that that's read on Rosh Hashanah. Why is it that Lavan's name is left out of the Torah? So again, we don't really see that again. Rav Schwab's answer would say, okay, it was left out because when we read it on Rosh Hashanah, that should jar us. But again, Rashi deals with that here, and he says the only thing that really to focus on was Rivka. Okay, I'm bringing this in just so we see some family tree, some yichus here. Nachor is the brother of Avram. He has a son named Besuel. Besuel has a daughter Rivka, and he also has a son named Lavan. Let's take a look in this next source. This next source is at the end of last week's parsha, at the end of Toldos, is that after the episode with Yaakov taking the brachos, Esav wants to kill Yaakov. Rivka decides we got to send him out of here. So instead of, and we talked about this last week, she should have rather than just telling Abarbanel at this point, she didn't just tell Yitzchak, we've got to send away Yaakov because Esav wants to kill him, because then Yitzchak may have blamed Rivka for all this. Instead, she says, we got to send away Yaakov because he's got to marry a nice girl, and the local girls, the Kanani girls, are terrible. So he says, I want to send them back to my family house. So the pasuk says, and that's in the chapter 28 there, Chaf Ches, that's the end of last week's parsha and Toldos. Vayishlach Yitzchak es Yaakov, Yitzchak sends away Yaakov, Vayach Padan Aram, and Lavan, he goes to Lavan, and it clearly tells us who's Lavan. Ben Besuel ha'arami achi Rivka. Lavan is the son of Besuel, the brother of Rivka, Aim Yaakov and Esav. And remember, Rivka is the mother of both Yaakov and Esav. So the pasuk clearly identifies Lavan as Ben Besuel. Lavan is Ben Besuel, which now creates an issue. And again, I never noticed it till this year, but it should really jump out at us. The next source, the third set of psukim, is from this week's Parsha, Vayetze. And as Yaakov is on his way to Lavan's house, so he says when he gets very close, he comes to a watering hole. He comes to a well, and he sees a group of shepherds. And he's kind of surprised because the working day is not over, yet they seem to have finished working for the day. So let's see. Aleph, Vayisa Yaakov Raglav, Yaakov picks up his feet, and he goes to the people of the east. Beis, Vayar Vinei Be'er Basadeh, and he sees, and behold, there's a well in the middle of a field, Vinei Sham, Shlosha Edrei Tzon, there are 3 flocks of sheep that are Rovtzim Alel, lying down by it, Kimina Be'era, Hi Yashku Adarim. That clearly is a well that is used for all of the flocks to drink. Evan Gedol Al Pi HaBe'er, there's a very large rock on top of the well. It's like a cork on top of a bottle that it's protecting it so nothing, the debris falls in there. And they're waiting for all the other shepherds to arrive so they can in unison push off the rock, and that's when they'll give their flock something to drink. All of the flocks would gather there, and the shepherds would work together to roll the rock, from the mouth of the well, and then they would give drink to all of the sheep. When they were done, they would return the rock in unison. They would bring the rock back. Okay, next page, 2. Daled, Vayomer Lam Yaakov. Yaakov says to them, Achai, my brothers, where are you all from? We've come from Haran. Hey, Vayomer Lam, so he says to them, whoa, you guys are from Haran, that's where I'm heading. Es Lavan ben Nachor, Hayadatem es Lavan ben Nachor. Do you guys know Lavan, who's the son of Nachor? My uncle Lavan, that's where I'm going. Lavan is the brother of Rivka. So do you know Lavan ben Nachor? Vayomer Yadanim, and they say, we know. I never noticed that till this year. Why is he calling him Lavan ben Nachor? We just saw in the Psukim, who was Lavan's father? Besuel. Why is he being called Lavan ben Nachor? We just saw, if you look back, I'll flip back the page, look back at the middle source. When Yitzchak sent Yaakov on his way, he told him to go to Lavan ben Besuel. Go to Lavan, who's the son of Besuel. Nachor was who to Lavan? His grandfather. So if Nachor is Lavan's grandfather, and that's why Yitzchak is referring to him as Lavan ben Besuel, why when Yaakov is referring to him, to his townfolk, why does he call him Lavan ben Nachor? He should call him Lavan ben Besuel, the same way his dad referred to him when he sent him on his way. And we know who Lavan's father was. It was Besuel, not Nachor. Nachor was his grandfather. So why is Yaakov calling him Lavan ben Nachor? I did not notice that till this year. I want to share with you two approaches. One is a very clear-cut approach, and this is from the Ramban, Nachmanides. In his commentary on the Chumash, Ramban picks up on this. He's very sensitive. Here's what he says. Haydatem es Lavan ben Nachor. Yaakov asks his townfolk, Lavan's neighbors, do you know my uncle Lavan, who's the son of Nachor? So Hayanikar v'yadua b'shem avi aviv. He says, Lavan, he's sensitive to this. Why is he calling him Lavan, the son of Nachor? Nachor was the grandfather. Why is he referring, he's associating Lavan with the grandfather. So Raman says, Hayanikar v'yadua b'shem avi aviv. It was the way it went, is that Lavan, on his business card, he always says, he associated himself most closely with his grandfather. Kihu nechbad me'aviv, because Nachor was a lot more honorable than his father, Besuel. Lavan is someone who is trying to toot his horn, and he is trying to self-promote himself. So amongst his own people, yes, his father was Besuel. But why should I hang my head on Besuel? Who was more chashuv than Besuel? The grandfather, Nachor. So Yaakov knows this. Yaakov knows, I guess his mother, Rivka, must have told him some of the family dynamics. So he knows that the best way to refer to Lavan around his townfolk is not Lavan ben Besuel, but Lavan ben Nachor, because that's who Lavan always associated himself with. V'rosh beis avosam. He says Nachor was the head of their he was the patriarch of their family. Like it says in earlier, or rather later, Elohei Avraham ve'Elohei Nachor. It should be Elohei Avraham. Is that when Lavan takes an oath, what does he say to Yaakov? He takes an oath by the God of Avram, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ve'Elohei Nachor, and the false gods of Nachor, meaning Nachor was a brother of Avram. So Lavan himself, when he needs to take a shavua, when he needs to take an oath, he would refer back to the Zaydah. He would refer back to Nachor. So Yaakov knows this about him. I guess Rivka must have told him. Now the Ramban throws in a second line, V'yitaken, and it's also possible, Shaya Besuel Adam Pachos Maila. Could also be Besuel was a little bit of a degenerate. Maybe he was a little bit of a lowlife. And Lavan didn't want to be associated with his father. He wanted to be associated with his grandfather, because his grandfather was the one who was chashuv. Imagine you have some very famous personality, and the son is a no-goodnik. The grandson, who does he want to attach himself to? He wants to attach himself to the grandfather. There's no covet out of attaching himself to his father. His father never amounted to anything. But he could attach himself to his grandfather. That's what he wants to do. So Yaakov knows that. I guess his mother must have told him this. So again, when Yitzchak sent him on his way, Yitzchak said, yeah, go to Lavan ben Besuel. He's speaking the facts. That's who he is, Lavan ben Besuel. But Yaakov is now in Lavan's territory. He wants to call Lavan by the name Lavan wants to be called by. Lavan doesn't want to be called Lavan ben Besuel, either just because Nachor was more chashuv, or the second idea the Ramban says, maybe Besuel was a lowlife. So he doesn't want to be known as Lavan ben Besuel. He wants to hang his hat on his grandfather, on the Zaydah, hang on his yichus. So that's what he's saying there. And he only wanted to be associated amongst his townfolk by his grandfather's name. So that's why Yaakov, when he's speaking to the townsfolk, he says Lavan ben Nachor. He came at Sanu, and we find this elsewhere. Bayan Lavan uBesuel. So he says, what's his proof? This is in Chayei. What's his proof that perhaps Besuel was a little bit of a lowlife? Is because when it came time when Eliezer was talking to Lavan and his father Besuel about the possibility of bringing Rivka back to Canaan to marry Yitzchak, So the Torah tells us, Vayan Lavan u'Besuel. Lavan speaks first and then Besuel. By the fact that Lavan is standing up and speaking before his father seems to indicate that his father was not all that, wasn't from the upper rungs of society. That's why the son is the one who's making these arrangements and speaking first. That's what. So the Ramban's using that as a proof. So his first approach is that what? That maybe he wants to just attach himself to Nachor because Nachor was the patriarch. Now he's saying, no, maybe it was more than that. Not just that Nachor was the patriarch, but maybe Besuel was a lowlife. So Lavan doesn't really want to be known as the son of Besuel. He wants to be known as the son of Nachor. And then he says, Ulai haya kol zeh lemalas Avram. And he says, lastly, and maybe all of this was because of the great stature of Avraham. So he says, and maybe another reason why he wants to attach himself to Nachor is because since Avraham was the one who became so famous in the region, and everybody speaks of him in his grand role that Avram plays in the big scheme of things, everyone wants to attach themselves to Avram. So how do you attach yourselves to Avram? Because Avram had a brother Nachor, who's my patriarch. So again, it makes sense if he wants to hang his hat on someone who's chashuv, on someone who's important. Nachor is the one that he hangs it on, not Besuel. Besuel doesn't have much of a connection to Avram, but Nachor is Avram's brother. They grew up together. They arm wrestled together. They went to birthday parties together. So Nachor is the one that he wants to be associated with. So here's a bunch of several different approaches to the Ramban, but they're all revolving around the same idea: is that Lavan preferred to be connected to Nachor over his own father, which was Besuel. And Yaakov is aware of this. That's why when Yaakov is speaking to the townfolk, he knows how Lavan wants to be known. So therefore, he's referring to him as Lavan ben Nachor. But when Yitzchak sent him on his way, he spoke in all honesty and said, yeah, go to Lavan ben Besuel. That's who he was. But when you're speaking to the townfolk, and you got to be sensitive to how does Lavan want to be referred to, that's why Yaakov switches into that mode of speaking. That's the Ramban's approach. And it fits very well. I want to show you another approach, though. I saw this quoted, and I had to look it up in the original, and you'll see how this is going to find its way into Shulchan Aruch as well. So this first source we're going to look at, it's from the Tshuvos, it's from the response of the Trumas Hadeshen. The Trumas Hadeshen was Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, who was one of our very early Rishonim in Ashkenaz. He lived in France, Germany area, and he believed he was in the 1200s. So he's like in the time of the Balei Tosos. I think he was a student of the Maram Rutenberg. So he pretty much ends up being like a contemporary of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher. So the Trumas Hadeshen was one of the serious Rishonim of Ashkenaz, and many of the halachas that the Ramah brings down, he'll often be quoting the Trumas Hadeshen, because his Trumas Hadeshen of Yisrael Isserlin, he was one of the real foundational pillars of Ashkenaz. So let's see what he sees here. Here's the question. This comes up quite often in slightly different contexts. Let's see. Sheila Chaf Aleph. Here's the 21st question that he has in his response in the volume 1. It's volume 1 Aleph Chaf Aleph. Response 21. Mumar is an apostate, someone who opts out of the Jewish community and converts to another religion. Mumar she'odenu omed b'risho. You have someone who is an apostate and he has not done tshuva. He has completely opted out of Yiddishkeit. He's no longer associating with the Jewish community. He's associating with the Gentile community, with a different religion. And he has Omed Berisho. He has not done tshuva. He has not found his way back. Oh, what's that word? Shenifkar Berisho? I don't know what that word is. Shenifkar Berisho. I'm going to have to look up in the original what that word was. This is okay. Heich Koren Livno Lalos L'Torah. So let's say his son wants to get an aliyah in shul. So his son is still a kosher Jew. The son's not an apostate, but the father's a good-for-nothing apostate. He's converted to this other religion. He's made a chilul Hashem. So the question is, how does the son get called up to an aliyah? Are we going to call him up as Reuven ben Yaakov? If, God forbid, Yaakov was that apostate, why should he be associated with him? Why should he mention him? So Tshuva, here's his answer. What do you do in such a scenario? Ira, it appears to me, Diyikru'u b'shem avi aviv. Call him up by the name of his father's father. In other words, he wouldn't come up as Reuven ben Yaakov. He'd come up as Reuven ben Yitzchak. Call him by the grandfather, by the Zayda. Kimo Avi Asaf ben Yitzar. There's an example in Tanakh of Avi Asaf, the son of Yitzar. I believe that was a son of, in other words, rather than say he was a son of Korach, his father was Korach. Korach was ben Yitzar. So instead of calling him Avi Asaf ben Korach, they called him Avi Asaf ben Yitzar. It's a way of sparing. Why should he be associated with Korach? He said he found this in the famous book, Sefer Hasidim by Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, again, also contemporary in Ashkenaz, from the Hasidei Ashkenaz. Shamati, I heard from one of the giants of our generation, Shirabo Echad Me'agdolem, that one of his Rabbeim, one of his teachers, he doesn't name him, so he says, I've heard from one of the other great giants of our generation who heard from his teachers, Hey Shiv Lo, he asked him the same question and he answered him, Shikru Beno Bishmo Levad. Don't even call him up by a father. Just call him up as Yamod Ruvain. Everybody else in the shul gets called up Yamod, Ploni ben Ploni, Shlishi, Yamod, Ploni ben Ploni Ruvi'i. And now we get to Ruvain, Yamod Ruvain. Don't even say Ben. Because why are you saying the grandfather? And then why? And how could you say the father? The father's a Meshumad. The father is a Mumar. This is someone who's just gone off the deep end. The Ein Nira, because I don't like that approach. Just call him up without a Ben something. The Havale Genai, that's embarrassing him. Shikru Bishino Me'achiram. You're calling him up different than everyone else. Everyone else gets called up Ploni ben Ploni, and this guy just gets called up as Ploni. So everyone's going to look and wonder, what's going on with him? What happened there? What's the reason? And everyone's going to start murmuring, and it's going to be terrible. The Shapir Dami Likros Avi Asaf Bar Yitzar. You should call him the son who's the son of the grandfather, like what the Torah did by Avi Asaf Bar Yitzar. That's what you should do. That's what you should call him up. Don't call him up as just his name, because then everyone's going to look. It's why, what happened, what's going on, and talk about him. It's Lashon Hara, everything. Why embarrass him? Just call him up by the name of his grandfather. Now look what I've got in bold. Here's another example of this. It says in this week's Parsha, it says in our Parsha this week, Vayetze, Yaakov says to the people of Haran, Hayadatem, do you know Es Lavan ben Nachar? Do you know Lavan ben Nachar? He could have just said Lavan, but instead, what did he do? He called him Lavan ben Nachar. Umipiboshes ben Shol Yarad. There's another example in Tanakh. Haniro Anias Daiti Kasavti. He goes, this is what makes the most sense to me. Call him up by the name of his son of his grandfather. So what the Trumas Hadeshin is doing is he's giving a very practical halachic answer. What do you do for a mumar? By the way, I was saying a mumar is an apostate. That's not true. A meshumad is an apostate. A mumar is someone who's publicly violating the Torah and the mitzvahs. A mumar is someone who says, I've had it. I know enough to be an observant Jew, but I'm not doing it because I don't, I'm throwing it all away. That's what a mumar is. I'm sorry. It's like a wanton sinner. Meshumad is a apostate. So here's this fellow's a wanton sinner. So what does he do? He wants to know the son. Why should the son bear the shame of being called up by the father's name? And why should we give the father any covet? So the Trumas Hadeshin says, call him up the son of his grandfather. Another one of his contemporaries said to call him up just by his name, but he says, no, why do that? You're going to embarrass him. So call him up the son of his grandfather. His grandfather was a good Jew. And he says, as a proof to this, he looks to this week's Parsha. It says, Haidatim is Lavan ben Nachar. The Torah, Yaakov says to the people, Lavan ben Nachar. He didn't call Lavan ben Mesua. Why? So maybe like what the Ramban said. Ramban said that Nachar was an upstanding person, and one of his theories was that Besua was a lowlife. So Yaakov he's trying to protect the dignity of Lavan. He knows Lavan doesn't like to be associated with his father, Besua, because Besua was a lowlife. So what does he do instead? He calls him Lavan ben Nachor. He's looking out for his dignity. That's what he's doing. That's what Trumas Hadeshin says it. So probably what happened was Trumas Hadeshin saw the Ramban, or he learned like the Ramban, that what was going on was that he knew that's why Lavan didn't want to be associated with Besua. Besua was a low life. So instead of embarrassing him, he says Lavan ben Nachor, because Nachor was an upstanding citizen. So I thought that's fascinating. The Trumas Hadeshin is learning a halacha from this, or he's bringing it as a proof. Now I want to show you how this actually finds its way into normative halacha. The next source I've got there is the Ramah. The Ramah is the Ashkenazic, so to say, addition to the Shulchan Aruch. We know that the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Yosef Karo, was Sephardic. So every now and then, the Rama would stick in his piece to show if there was a unique Ashkenazic custom which had developed that relates to the section that the Shulchan Aruch was talking about. He'll stick it in. So look what the Rama does. This is in Orach Chaim, the section of Shulchan Aruch dealing with everyday life, and it's in Kuf Lamed Tes 139. It's Sif Gimel. It's chapter 3. So here's the Rama. Misha Aviv Mumar La'avodas Kochavim Mazolos. Let's say someone's father. So this could go either way. It could either mean that he's apostate because he's worshiping false gods, or it might just mean that he's a mumar, that he's a wanton sinner, he's abandoned any semblance of Jewish observance. Karan b'shem avi aviv, you call this guy up to the Torah, like what the Shumas Hadeshin was saying. Call him up by his father's father, by the Zayda. Avalo b'shmo levad. Don't call him up by his name alone. Shlo levai shabarabim. You don't want to cause this person to be embarrassed in public. And look who he quotes there. Taf Hey is the Shumas Hadeshin. Shumas Hadeshin, Simon Chaf Hey, Chaf Aleph rather, and also the Sefer Hasidim. So he's quoting those two sources. Remember, the Shumas Hadeshin himself said, "Look at the Sefer Hasidim." That's who sides with them. So he says that's what we should do. La'alacha. If we have a person whose father is either an apostate or a wanton sinner, call this fellow up by the name of his grandfather. Now he qualifies this a little. He gives us a little bit more that the Shumas Hadeshin did not do. He says, "V'dafka shelo ala miyamav b'shem aviv." That's only if this guy has not until now been getting aliyahs in town by the name of his father. Let's say until now he's been getting called up as Reuven ben Yaakov. And then Yaakov, 20 years into this guy's aliyah career, Yaakov goes off the deep end and becomes a mumar. So he says, look, since this long, everyone knows him as Yaakov, as Reuven ben Yaakov. If you're going to start now not calling him as Reuven ben Yaakov, you're going to cause him embarrassment because everyone's going to say, whoa, why are you calling him as Reuven ben Yitzchak? We all know him as Reuven ben Yaakov. Oh, did something happen to his father? And now everyone's going to start talking. So he says, Dafka, he goes, you got to use your seichel, use your intellect, and use your, come on, God gave us brains. So only do this to start calling a person up by his grandfather if the whole town doesn't already know him by his proper name. Alimu Gadol, this guy is an adult. For all these years, he's been getting an aliyah as Reuven ben Yaakov, the Hamir Aviv, and now Yaakov goes off the deep end and becomes an apostate or a wanton open sinner. Then Koronoso b'shem Aviv, continue to call him by his father's name, because that's what everyone is used to. Shlo levai shabarabim. You're going to embarrass him. If now everyone's going to start saying, well, what changed? What changed? And also another reason to continue doing this is, let's say you're going to worry about the hatred of this mumar. Let's say this mumar, this apostate or wanton sinner, now that he's not part of the Jewish community anymore, if he finds out and he thinks that he's being disrespected by the community, that when his son gets an aliyah, they don't call him up, they don't even want to mention his name in shul anymore, maybe he'll take vengeance against the Jewish community and try to ingratiate himself to his new religious community. Let's say he's converted and joined the Catholic Church, and this was a real fear that people had back in Europe. Now this apostate's going to want to ingratiate himself to his new religious home, so he'll libel the Jewish community or something like that. You got to be very, very careful. So it's not a black and white issue that as soon as the father goes off the deep end, start calling him up by the Zayda's name. That's not so simple. You've got to weigh out what's going on here. So I thought that's very important, how the Rama adds these qualifications to what the Trumas Hadeshin did. The Rama, he does paskin like the Trumas Hadeshin. He says that's how to go, but he adds that very important detail there. Let me just read you one more line because this comes up very often in a different context. Va'asufi ushtuki. So there are two terms there, asufi and ashtuki. What's an asufi? Asufi is the term that Chazal use for asufi, means someone who was gathered in from the market, meaning this was a child who was just being raised on the street. Nobody knows who this kid's father is. That's an asufi. He was brought in from the street. We all know who the mother was, because, she could have been an unwed mom. And listen, this isn't the first period in world history where women were getting taken advantage of by men who seduced them, or men who could have unfortunately raped them, or people, if they were in dire circumstances, someone could have paid them for their services. This has been happening throughout time. So there were unwed mothers throughout Jewish history whose kids, we weren't sure, the yichus, who exactly was the father, because of the nature of that kid's origins. That was referred to as an asufi, who's gathered in from the marketplace, but we don't know for a fact who his dad was. or shtuki. A shtuki meant like shtika, means quiet, means the way Chazal say that is every time this kid would ask his mom, tell me about who my dad is, she would say to him, shtok, be quiet, I don't want to talk about it. So again, the kid was born under very questionable circumstances. We're not 100% sure what the yichus, who the father is, but we know for sure who the mother is. A kid couldn't have survived without the mother because he needed to be nursed. Someone had to raise this kid. So we all know who the mother is, but we don't know who the father is. What do you do with a child like that when it's time for him to get an aliyah? So the Ramah ends by saying, Asufi Yushtuki, if you have a kid, he's a Jewish kid, we know his mom was Jewish, but we don't know who the father was. Korinoso b'shem avi imo. We call him by the name of his mother's father. Yimenu Yodea, and if we don't know even that, let's say this kid was abandoned as a child. And by the way, this was also very common. There were cases, they say Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, the famous Rav Chaim Brisker, they say his house was the destination in Brisk and in part of Lita, where unwed mothers would drop off their kids and he would raise them. These unwanted children that could have been born out of very, very questionable circumstances. Single moms who got taken advantage of or were desperate and sold themselves, whatever it was, terrible circumstances. They say Reb Chaim Brisker, everyone just thinks about this incredible Talmudic logic and learning, this new methodology of Gemara study that he introduced to his world. Yeah, he did all that, but he was also known as this massive Baal Chesed, where people who had unwanted babies would basically drop them off, and he would hire wet nurses to raise these kids, like no question asked. It was like the fire station, where they want people to drop off unwanted babies at the fire station or at the police station rather than, God forbid, they should die. So Reb Chaim Brisker, he was like that. So it says, let's say you had a case like this and you don't even know who the mother is. That's what he says, Vimenu Yodea, if you don't even know who the mother is, so you can't call this kid up for an aliyah as the son of his mother's father. So Karunoso b'shem Avraham K'mo Lager. The same way you would call up a ger tzedek, a convert. He gets an aliyah as Ben Avraham. That's what you do for this kid. So this does come up, even though hopefully we don't have cases so much anymore of asufi and shtuki. What you do have are children who are products of intermarriage. So let's say you have a boy who's perfectly halachically Jewish. His mom was Jewish. She was married to a non-Jew, and this boy's father's a non-Jew. And let's say this kid becomes Shomer Torah Mitzvos. He's a full Jew. So what happens if he becomes Shomer Torah Mitzvos and now he gets an aliyah? So how do we call him up? So we would call him up as Ruvain, the son of his mother's father. We knew children like this, and fine young men, and no fault of their own. They don't have a Jewish dad to be called up after, so they're called up as the son of their maternal grandfather. So that's what the Ramah says. Let's see one more opinion here. The Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says Shalom Lavaisha Barabim. So it says is that, let's say you're talking about, this is the son of the mumar, the son of the apostate, and or the wanton sinner. He's already a gadol. He's an adult. He's been getting aliyahs for years by a certain name. You can't just stop calling them up that way. Because if you stop calling them up that way, you're going to do more harm. You're going to terribly embarrass him. So continue to call him up. So now the Mishnah Berurah qualifies. That's the Chafetz Chaim. He qualifies this a little bit. Look what he writes here. Mikol makom, even though you're going to call him up as Reuven ben Yaakov, and the Yaakov is the apostate or the sinner. Mikol makom lo yomar tarim alaviv. Don't start giving him honorific titles. In other words, you're going to call him up as Reuven ben Yaakov. Don't call him up, he says, kmo chaver or morenu. Don't call him up as a chaver. Chaver was a title that they would give out in European communities. They still do this in the German communities in Washington Heights. At a certain point, if a person's been an honorable member of the community, he's volunteered, he's served on the committees, the boards, whatever, they'll sometimes give him the honor of calling him up as a chaver. Chaver. So get called up, Yamod Chaver Ruvain ben Yaakov Shlishi. So that's a real title. And that was very common in Ashkenaz. So he says, so let's say the father was an apostate. Don't still call him up with a title. Okay, you don't want to embarrass this guy, so you got to call him Reuven ben Yaakov, but don't say Reuven ben Hachaver Yaakov if he once had that title, or Morenu as our teacher if he once had that title. He ain't Lomar Sheker. You don't say Sheker. It's enough. We got to call him up by the father's name because of Shalom. You don't want to embarrass this guy, but you're not going to say Sheker. Call this apostate a Chaver. Rak Yomer b'chipazon. Say it very quickly. Don't even say Yamod Reuven ben Yaakov. Nice and slowly say Yamod Reuven ben Yaakov, like kind of under the back. You got to say it, but say this quickly and just get it done with. Livli Argishu Am. Try to say it quick and nondescript so no one catches it. Now, the only excuse to continue calling Reuven ben Yaakov up as Reuven ben Yaakov, because we're nervous about embarrassing him, that's only if he's still living in the same town where everyone has already been accustomed to hearing him get called up for the last 20 years as Reuven ben Yaakov. But let's say he he takes a new job elsewhere, he moves to a new town. If he moves to a new town and now he still has this apostate father, so in this new town, it's not going to be embarrassing to call him up by Reuven ben Yitzchak, by his grandfather, because nobody there is used to hearing how he was called up before. So he says, now the Gabbai asks him, Nu, what's your name for an aliyah? Ech nikra Torah, how are you going to get called up? Yomer Shem Avi Aviv. Then you should be called up by the grandfather. As soon as you can ditch being called up by the apostate father, he should do so. In his original town, you can't, either because you're nervous about vengeance from this guy, or you're nervous that it's going to embarrass this person's going to get everyone talking. But if he goes to a new town and no one knows, it's like a clean slate, the best case scenario would be to get called up by the name of the grandfather. I thought that was fascinating. So what you had there was that the psukim clearly have an issue, that it says Lavan ben Nachor, when it should have said Lavan ben Besuel. What's going on? How do you understand this? The Ramban basically has a couple different approaches, all revolving around the same idea, that Besuel was a lowlife or was not as honorable as Nachor. So he wants to be known as Lavan ben Nachor. So that's how Yaakov refers to him. Of course, his real yichus was Lavan ben Besuel, but that's not how he wants to bill himself. So Yaakov obliges him, indulges him, and that's how he calls him as well. And Trumas Hadeshin takes that a step further, and he says that this is actually brought up in halacha, that if someone's father really becomes an apostate or a wanted sinner, call him up by the grandfather, and he brings us a raya, brings us a proof. It says Lavan ben Nachor. Thought that was fascinating. Okay, I want to just speak out to you. We don't have enough time to do this next source, all of it completely. So let's go to the third one. The third one I thought was a beautiful idea here. The third one, so it's on page 5. So there it is. This is from Torah Ladas by Rabbi Matis Bloom. And he has a beautiful idea here that he says over in the name of Rav Shlomo Kluger. Rav Shlomo Kluger, we've quoted him before on other occasions. Rav Shlomo Kluger was a Gaon. He was a real genius, and he was a leader of Galicianer Jewry in the I believe in the 1700s, going into the 1800s. So let's look at this. There's a pasuk that is in this week's parsha, which is just screaming. It needs to be explained, because on its face value, it's just too harsh. The pasuk says, "Vayehav gam es Rachel mileah." The pasuk says that Yaakov loved Rachel mileah. Sounds like it means more than Leah. So it sounds like, and it's very clear, it sounds like he loved Rachel more than Leah. Rachel, remember, was the woman that he wanted to marry. His father-in-law Lavan tricked him into marrying Leah, but that wasn't who he had initially wanted. He wanted Rachel. So it seems to be only natural that he loves Rachel more than Leah. Now, what that means is he still loved Leah. It doesn't say that he loved Rachel and he did not like Leah. It says he loved Rachel more than Leah, which clearly means he loved Leah too. She was a wonderful woman. He just loved Rachel more. Now, again, in the eyes of Leah, that meant that she felt hated. That's why when she's naming, you could see this when she's naming her children, Hamilave Ishti, Ishi, that she's saying when she has a second son, Levi, that now my husband will be drawn to me. She was always feeling bad that she wasn't as loved as Rachel, but she still was loved. Even when the Torah says that Hashem sees kisnua, that she was hated. So all the Mefarshim point out that can't literally mean she was hated. Yaakov didn't hate her. Why would it be mutter to stay married to her if he hated her? It means that he loved Rachel more than Leah. And in Leah's eyes, knowing that Rachel was more beloved than she was, that's akin to feeling hated, but that doesn't mean that Yaakov actually despised her. It wouldn't have been right to stay married. But be that as it may, it's very clear in the Psukim that Yaakov has more fond feelings for Rachel than Leah. That's the way to read this pasuk. So I want to share with you a beautiful idea. It's from Shlomo Kluger. He gives us a whole new way to read this pasuk. Let's look at this. Chazal say that when Yaakov originally planned to marry Rachel, he anticipated that Lavan might try to deceive him and gave secret signs for Rachel to use to identify herself. However, when Rachel saw that her father planned on giving Leah to Yaakov, she did not want her sister to suffer the shame of being discovered as an impostor before marriage, so she divulged a set of signs to her. Just pause for a second. I loved also the connection. We just saw in the Trumas Adeshin and in the Ramah how sensitive we have to be not to embarrass another person and to protect their dignity. And that's why when we call the person up, we want to call him up as the grandfather, but not in a situation when he was already known in that town as the son of Yaakov, the son of his father, because then it's going to embarrass him, that everyone's going to start talking about. So we see this sensitivity we really need to have, not to embarrass anyone else. And we really see this in the way Chazal understood what happened with Rachel and Leah, is that Rachel gave over those simanim, she gave over those signs, whatever those signs were that she had fixed up with Yaakov, to make sure that that he's marrying the right woman. Rachel did not want Leah to be embarrassed, to be humiliated. So Rachel willingly gave those signs to Leah. That's how Leah was able to marry Yaakov. Okay, next paragraph. The Mefarshim note, this was an act of tremendous self-sacrifice on the part of Rachel, for it was understood that the two sons of Rivka were to marry the two daughters of Lavan. And if Yaakov was going to marry Leah, then Rachel was doomed to be the wife of Esav. In spite of this, though, Rachel was willing to risk her entire future happiness so as not to cause her sister any embarrassment. So that's a real act of self-sacrifice. Rachel had no idea that she's going to be able to be a second wife to Yaakov. By giving the simanim, by giving those special signs, the secret signs to Leah, for all she knew, that means that's it. Leah's going to be his only wife. So that's really self-sacrifice. I go to Shlomo Kluger's that sounds. So Shlomo Kluger says, now I'll tell you what does our pasuk mean. Explains that this is what the pasuk means when it says Vayev Gam Es Rachel Mi Leah. When Yaakov heard of this, when Yaakov found out about what happened, how did he get duped into marrying Leah? There was only one way, and he found out that what happened? Rachel had given over those secret signs to Leah because she didn't want Leah to be humiliated. When Yaakov heard of this noble act of compassion, in addition to loving her as a wife, he loved Rachel even more. Mileah, because of the way she had conducted herself with Leah. So look how he's reading the pasuk from Shlomo Kluger. Vayev Gamis Rachel. Now he really loved it. He loved Rachel until now. He always was fond of Rachel, and that's why he wanted to marry her. But Vayev Gamis Rachel Mileah. Why did he love Rachel even more? Leah, because of what she did for Leah. Wow, that act of self-sacrifice, what she was willing to do to save her sister from being humiliated, that made him love Rachel even more. So to me, that's phenomenal. First of all, it's a new way of learning this pasuk, but also look what happened to Rachel. Here it was, she was willing to sacrifice her relationship with Yaakov. Not only did she still end up marrying Yaakov, but this was actually the cause of Yaakov loving her even more. So look how special that is. Not only did Rachel not lose out, she actually gained from this because her husband even had more feelings of affection towards her. So I think what we could get out of this is as follows. Very often when we're in a situation when we want to do chesed, a lot of times our initial reaction is that, I don't know, I want to look out for myself. Do I really want to share with somebody else? When I share with somebody else, whether that's chesed, whether that's tzedakah, whether that's my time, whether it's my attention, whatever it is, when I share with another person who really needs, not only do I not lose out, I gain from it. Whether that means is that, okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will repay me back double what it is, like whatever it is. Here, look how this played out with Rachel. Not only did she not lose, she was still able to marry Yaakov, but she gained from it. The way Rosh Shlomo Kluger's learning it is that Yaakov even appreciated her more and felt more affectionate towards Rachel based on the way she had treated Leah. I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful way to learn that pasuk, and I had never seen that before. All right, I hope this helped increase your appreciation for Parshas Vayetze. I hope these are some new sources you may not have seen before, some dealt with some issues you may not have seen before. And I thank you so much for joining. I thank you for being part